good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is QuianaDenae Perkins, and I am excited to be introducing the VUU today, the Church of the Larger Fellowships, weekly webcast, podcast, talk show, friend gathering. We are excited to have you here. It is March 11th, and so we're going to spend today talking about COVID, but we're going to get in it in a few minutes and let some folks get in the door. I am here in lovely Ann Arbor, Michigan. It is a gray day, but we are at the height of what we like to refer to as false spring, because it will snow again. I have no illusion. I'm still walking in my boots. My coats are still out. And yesterday was 60. And today is not 60 and it's gray. So we are, playing the weather game. And I'm excited about the weather game because it means at least for a moment I get to see the sun and it kisses my little brown skin. So I'm going to pass the mic to my friend Aisha.
Hi, I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm in Seattle, Washington, where today it is bright, sunny. And we also are getting a little bit of spring, but in Seattle, we won't get snow again, although I'm saying that we had a 52-year storm a few weekends ago, and I don't even own a shovel. So I think we had, actually we definitely got over a foot, but anyway, it was gone literally in 2 days. So it'll just get gray and cloudy here eventually. And then I think I talk about this every year leading up to spring. There's a phenomenon in the Northwest called January. So we have a nice spring, and then June comes and it feels like January because it's 60 and cold and rainy. So fun times here in the Seattle area. Chris, how are you doing?
I am enjoying we too have fall spring here, QuianaDenae, and I'm just enjoying it for every moment that we have it, because I know that the snow and cold is coming back. I have no delusions of grandeur of spring here in Augusta County, Virginia. But it is just gorgeous. It's got a great breeze, and all the things are trying to bloom and come out. So it's just really, really lovely. Who's next? Dawn, have you gone?
I have not. Thank you. I am here in South Jersey, and I am committed to the delusion of spring. My front yard is covered with crocuses, and they're beautiful, and I don't know what they're called, but those little white flowers that come up around the same time are all over my backyard, and it's almost, all right, it's probably 65. It feels like 75 to me. It just is awesome. And yeah, so I don't care what the calendar says. I'm going to believe that it is spring. Yeah, here in South Jersey, and I'm about the same latitude as you, I think, Chris. So yeah, we're having the same weather. It's pretty awesome. I guess that's it for me. Has Michael gone? I skidded in a little late. Michael, you're up next, friend.
I have not gone. Spring has sprung here in New York. It's fall, spring, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. It might get cold again this weekend, but the flowers are blooming. The crocuses are blooming in my front yard. I'm moving to be closer to my Wi-Fi because I can do that since my child is in school. She is not having first grade in the dining room, so I'm moving. Here we are. The internet is weird. It is a beautiful, beautiful sunny day. I'm in short sleeves here because it's like 60 degrees. But it's March, and those are snowdrops, Dawn, the little white flowers in your backyard. They're snowdrops.
Okay. They're pretty. I like them.
And for all of those of you on the CLF email list, you will find out today just how important the blooming of the first crocuses are to me. It is my spiritual new year, and it is what I wrote my weekly e-blast on. So you will all find that out before long. And
nice.
Tanner,
Oh, damn.
Tanner Linden is not behind the chalice, so why don't you say hi?
Hi, excuse me. My name's Tanner Linden. I am the outreach person for the Church of the Larger Fellowship, and for the VUU, I run the tech. So I'll be making sure your comments from YouTube get over to our hosts in Zoom. So please drop any questions or comments or revelations that you have, and I'll make sure the hosts see them. As far as my weather, I live in Northern California, so if we had seasons, I haven't experienced them yet. And I couldn't tell you if it's spring or winter here. It's just California weather, and that's just fine. So I will pass it to QuianaDenae to kick off the rest.
Yeah. So my good friend Chris was reminding us that 1 year ago, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 or coronavirus, I don't know what they were using at the time, as a pandemic. So I guess I want to start with just another go around of people talking about where their lives were last week. So not what happened April, May, June, how we've survived, but what was going on for you a week around this time last year. And I can start. I was looking at my Facebook post, and I actually had been really sick to the point where I had food poisoning, and my coworker had to drive me home. And I was like looking at those things going, I don't even remember that, but it must have happened. I put it on Facebook. So I had been really sick, but I knew it wasn't COVID. It was something that I had eaten, and none of my other symptoms matched that. It was just, severe dehydration, because that's the kind of person I used to be, where I didn't drink enough because I was too busy working. So yeah, a year ago, I was trying to get over food poisoning, and also hearing about this thing called COVID and what it might mean for all of us. So I want to pass to my friend Michael. I want to know, where were you at a year ago, if you don't mind, my tender-hearted friend?
Well, my lovely co-hosts know this because I said before, but a year ago today, my grandfather passed away, and he lived not too far from me, and it was really hard. The pandemic had started in New York already. New York was shutting down. My child had her last day of school for the school year by March 11th. I think it was the 8th. No, the 8th was a Sunday. The 8th was the last time that the congregation, the bricks and mortar congregation I serve, worshipped in person. Still the last time they've worshipped in person. I thankfully had the opportunity to say goodbye to my grandfather a couple weeks earlier, but his funeral was canceled because of COVID concerns, because my grandmother is in her 80s and nobody wanted to make her sick. And so, I haven't seen my grandmother since my grandfather passed away, and it's real hard. And that's where I am on March 11th, 2021. These are the kind of first anniversaries that we all are experiencing. The first, we've gone more than a year since we've seen my husband's parents or family, for example. And lots of people, I think, are marking the fact that they've not seen people that they love and are used to being near and around, are used to giving hugs to, in over a year. Chris, Aisha?
Well, Seattle, like New York, was one of the first where the governors were saying we need to shut things down en masse. I remember the last 2 weeks a year ago, or maybe I'm trying to remember exactly. I think it started at the beginning of March. We were in a frenzy at I was still at a brick and mortar congregation, and do we shut down? Do we not shut down? There was still a lot of questions about how this was getting transmitted. And so I remember we kept just having emergency staff meetings in the library. And finally, it was like, we can't put people in danger. We have to, and I'm trying to remember when the last in-person service was. But it was, and I had to learn, I knew Zoom, but I had to be the one to manage Zoom, because everyone else hadn't had as much experience with it, but it was, I mean, the congregation I left skewed, we had 30 people over 90. So it just, I mean, we had out of like about 430 members. So we skew older. And so it was, because there was a lot of resistance to closing. It's like, no, people really need to be together. So then what we did the first 2 weeks leading up to the naming of that it was a pandemic was we canceled coffee hour. Then we had people sit far apart. Then we went from 2 services to 1. I mean, we kept trying to accommodate, and finally we just called it. And then I left in June, but they still haven't met in person. So yeah. Chris?
Yeah, so last year this time I was unemployed. I had started my consulting business, but I had left the congregation that I was employed at the previous September, October. And so going into a pandemic unemployed was really, really scary. But this week, that time, we were actually on spring break because my kids have spring break that lines up with, or had spring break that lines up with universities. And so we were in the Outer Banks, North Carolina, and we were trying to figure out what to do. Like, did we need to turn around and come right back? What was this going to mean for their senior year of high school? The school hadn't decided what to do because they were on spring break. And I distinctly remember that on the 10th, which was yesterday, a year ago, is when Finding Our Way Home was canceled. We got the final announcement that Finding Our Way Home was not going to be held in person. They were going to try and do something virtual. And so there was just a lot going on in our lives. And my kids' school, we got an email, actually, I think the day that WHO announced, the World Health Organization announced a pandemic, that the school was going to stay closed an extra week for spring break. So spring break was usually just a week. They were going to stay closed 2 weeks to give themselves time to figure out what to do. Because we were on spring break, their last day of in-person school, they never knew was going to be their last day of in-person school. It was just, when they left, they were leaving to go on spring break and be really excited. And everybody was like, oh yeah, there's this thing going on with COVID. But, at that point in time, we were getting so much misinformation from our government and, a lot of, it's just a bad flu. And, but all the information around transmission was just really not good. Good info that we, learned later on. But yeah, so there was a lot going on and packed in that one. I remember 2 or 3 days just going, wow, this is going to be something. Like before I just thought this was, a blip, and now this is going to be like a before and after moment, where you can mark before the pandemic and then after the pandemic. Dawn?
Hi. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. And I'm trying to think, a year ago, the congregation I serve, our board president at the time? Yeah, our board president at the time was a physician. And so that helped keep the level of panic down because we had somebody who understood science. And our treasurer was a microbiologist. So, I mean, we've got a university, so that helps. So we have those people who understand that sort of stuff. So but I remember thinking, and I varied between the two things, between the, okay, so we'll lock down for like a month, 6 weeks, and then we'll be back. With the other part of my brain that was envisioning some Monty Python nightmare of bring out your dead, and wondering where we were going to fall between the two. Yeah, my little congregation is, they were not sure that they were going to survive this. I remember that there was a lot of fear about, if we can't get back together, are we going to survive? And, and I think I had advocated for shutting down earlier than we did. But I think once the pandemic was because I had that, Monty Python thing going on in my head, like this is going to be awful. And then we did shut down, and boy, didn't we learn a whole lot in the first 2 weeks about Zoom and technology and what music does not sound like on Zoom. Oh, gee whiz, wasn't that a hard lesson? And I've been doing sort of the reflecting back this week about how incredibly, and I think the word resilient is being overused, and it sort of makes my teeth itch to use it because it's become sort of the catchphrase these days. But my people handled it. My octogenarians figured it out. They got somebody to like, there was like a designated person amongst my older folks who learned from one of our younger folks how to do this Zoom thing. And then she and the younger person had a class to teach the older folks how to do this Zoom thing. And it was amazing. And now I've got a 95-year-old who every Wednesday does a YouTube live video to remind people to do art because it's good for you. And just because you can't get outside doesn't mean you shouldn't do art, and you don't have to be good. I mean, it's the best of times and the worst of times, all rolled into one. So yeah, whew, what a year.
So I think, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I hope that the people who are watching will share where you were a year ago. We want to make this interactive with you. Leilani D has said that Leilani had to close. Leilani writes, "I closed my practice for the first time in 26 years." And that this is complex, this anniversary. I don't know anybody's pronouns unless you tell me, dear viewers. So I'm not going to make them up just because your name is Leilani.
I think what we are all starting to lean into is we remember that moment, but let's talk about some of the things that we've learned in the last year, whether it be about ourselves, the communities we serve, the communities we live in. I realized I don't really know how to cook, and it has been a year of cooking my own food, and that has been painful and wonderful and beautiful, but it's definitely been a learning moment. I'll start there and I'll open the floor. But what's something that you've learned over the last year? What are the learnings? What are the things that were hard? What are the things you're still struggling with? What are the things that leave you tender? And what are the things that make you feel resilient?
One of the things I learned was how much I relied on travel, and I not travel for travel itself, but being in Black and Brown communities, because I live in such a predominantly white, conservative, rural area. I didn't realize that my travel with Unitarian Universalism volunteer work and GA and conferences and all of that kind of thing was what was really helping me keep level as a brown person in the South, and how crucial it is to my mental health. Like it has been when the only other brown people I see were my children, for months at a time. That was super hard. That was really, really difficult. And so, it helps me now to know what do I need to do to care for myself in that way, and within my culture and within my community. And so I'm glad I learned that. That was a good learning. Still is hard, but I'm glad I learned it.
Yeah, I agree with Chris 1,000% with, because I'm a relatively new transplant to the Seattle area, 7.5 years. And so, and I'm not from the West Coast at all. So everybody, friends, chosen family, are on the East Coast. And so, yeah, how much I relied also on travel. My young adult children came home who did not expect to come home for weeks. And so the refrain for them was, I love you, but I'm like, listen, this is not a piece of cake for me either. Food shopping was stressful. We had to wear it was like hazmat suits, and I'd come home and need to sleep because it was so stressful. Like the imagining was these little things are in the air, right? So just as a family, I do cook QuianaDenae, and I cooked more. Like I learned to make bread. How many of us learned to make bread? I learned to make pie crust. But our family dynamic, here's the funniest. So my son is, last year he was a first year student in college, and my daughter was a senior. So they both loathed online learning. I mean, they were hostile. They were just hostile to it. And I can't even, so at one point, my husband says to my son, you want half a beer? My son goes, half? Oh, yeah, sure, Dad. It was just like everything was in that. I'm like, oh, you poor thing. You're used to having like pounding 3 or 4. I don't know, but it was just, and they're like, I love you, but I love you, but it was like, it just made me laugh. I love you too, but so it was, just relearning as a family, as grown ass adults having to be together and no one being allowed to go anywhere. Was just like, we're going to make this work with 2 dogs who won't shut up for weeks. So we did sort of.
I think one of the other things that I learned, because so you were talking about kids, my kids are 10 and 12, 10 and 13. I am not, I was never a crisis. I was never a homeschool, and I was never a crisis school teacher. So it became really apparent really fast that I'm an auxiliary, like education is the auxiliary part for me, right? Like I'll come to a conference. Once you start your book report, I'll be right there. I will help you. I will be at every play, every football game, but I am not sit down and do this math problem, Mom. That is not who I am. And I'm lucky to have a co-parent who was able to say, yes, we honor that. We'll do education over here. You come get these babies every weekend. And so it changed how we parent. It changed how we interacted. My co-parent and I have to be much more aligned. So even little things like, one day my kid came over and he was like, he's 10, right? Frat boy, my little frat boy. And he just had a serious mom conversation. He was like, Mom, what are you making for dinner? I said, chili. He's like, I had chili the last 2 meals. And I was like, you know what? That is totally valid because I, as an adult, that third bowl, I'm not feeling you, right? I'm like, third bowl is I'm eating this because I cannot waste food and because I'm too lazy to cook, right? But at 10, your third bowl of chili feels very different. So he had a heart-to-heart with me. I said, I'm gonna make you some quesadillas. I can respect that. So we even have to be, one of the things that me and their dad have to do is say, what'd you cook the last few days? We're even, so that our kids don't get bored with our food plan as we, switch them from house to house. And a year ago, I wouldn't have cared, but now it's like, after I spent all this time in this kitchen, you about to eat what I'm cooking. There isn't, did you laugh at that, Don? And we starve them. Like we still make food that we want. And if they don't eat it, then they just don't eat. But, we try. So a year ago, I wouldn't have cared so much, but they don't have other food choices. They're not eating at school or trading snacks with Jenny who sits next to them. This is it. And I know as an adult, if I don't have food choices, I'm hostile. So I'm trying to imagine a world for a 10 and 13-year-old, right?
Yeah. And food really did become such a big issue for so many people. And I remember, my kids, they went to a private school and they were there on scholarship. So that school didn't have the, pick up a meal somewhere, or meet a bus with lunch, free meals, because they were a private school and they just assumed that everybody had the same resources to be able to feed their kids. And having to feed my two children 2 additional meals a day, 2 teenage boys, while unemployed, was really stressful. And the fact that if you're using food stamps, you couldn't, at the beginning of the pandemic, you couldn't do any of the online shopping. Like, you had to go into the grocery store. They didn't have it set up yet. That didn't happen for like 2 or 3 months after the pandemic started. So anybody who needed to use, food stamps had to go in. You didn't have a choice. You couldn't even have it where you could go and pick up the food or, have it delivered. And that was additionally just so stressful for so many people that were, I remember the mutual aid boards of people who are immunocompromised just saying, who were on food stamps were like, can somebody please go shopping for me? Because I've got peanut butter and bread, and I've got these food stamps that I'd love to use, but I can't use it because I can't do my EBT card over the website. So food really did become a huge issue.
I can only imagine how stressful that I went into a supermarket last summer and had a panic attack. So I can only imagine having to, and especially having that be because you're using food stamps and like the added layer of, whew. And my child is 7 and she eats me out of house and home. So I can only imagine 2 17-year-olds. Like what that can be. But it's interesting. We talk about education, QuianaDenae. My co-parent has a job that is not as flexible as my jobs. I'm a religious professional. Like, I have congregations that understand when I need to do education for my kids. Well, my husband doesn't have that flexibility, and so I had to be the educator. And I will say, the question being, what did we learn? I learned just how badly how low a priority special education is for our public school institutions.
So can you say it again? Say it again.
Just how low a priority special education is for our public schools. My child is a special education student because she has some learning difficulties, and she got no educational support from March until September. Like, none. I had to make it up. People are like, oh yeah, my kids are on Zoom class and blibbity blue and this and that and Google Meets. And it wasn't until we got her into the inclusion class in the fall that she actually started getting live instruction on a regular basis, remotely. And she's blossoming now, and now she's back in school 4 days a week, which freaks me the F out. But that's a whole different ball of wax. But we agreed to put her back in school 4 days a week because A, she needs it, and B, we've both had our first doses of vaccine. We have a lot of viewer comments. I don't know if someone wants to read some of those. I so appreciate that you all are taking the invitation to tell us about what is going on in your lives and what was a year ago.
Yeah. Let's see. Stitcheroo, who uses she pronouns. 1 year ago, I filled out my census survey. I remember that. And they said that I remember half joking to myself, party of one if I survive. And that is real. That is really, yeah.
Yeah, and Darby wrote that the dishwasher died at the beginning of the 3 meals at home and Darby did 9 months of dishes before finding the switch on the wall that then permitted the dishwasher to work. I'd have gone around smashing switches on walls just in spite after that. I think 9 months of all those dishes.
But here's the thing, I hand wash dishes too, and it is a meditation. It is a prayer. It is a calming. It is a centering. So there is something about, for that person, you couldn't find that light switch because you weren't supposed to. That switch had been there on your wall the whole time. And you didn't need to flip it because you needed those moments over the sink. You needed that meditation. Washing dishes changes how you cook and how you eat, y'all. Because I'm like, look, you get 1 fork up in here every 24 hours. You do not need 6 forks to eat cheese puffs. I don't even know why you need a fork at all to eat cheese puffs, but I'm limiting you. So it just shifts your whole energy. But also, when I go in here and do these dishes later, what I refer to as my depression dishes, I'm going to I'm going to peel back and wash off those layers of depression that have been holding me there, that have made me afraid to go in my own kitchen. So don't underestimate dishwasher person as opposed to dishwasher machine. There's a beauty in it. There is a grace in it.
Oh, thank you, Kiana.
Glad you.
I want to lift up also the mask making and how many people all over the country, the world. So Leilani, who is on occupied Duwamish land, as am I, lives near me, because Leilani made 2 masks for me. So I have 2 of Leilani's masks, and thank you for that. And yes, the vaccine rollout in Seattle has been dismal in this area. It's just bizarre being one of the states that, like New York, it got hit soonest and pretty hard. That the vaccine rollout's been not funny. And Leilani also said, I found a new home in virtual BIPOC UU spaces. I took online classes in BIPOC only spaces. I'm hosting BIPOC only events now, a coffee hour, meditation hour, and I'm more in love with my pets.
That's really lovely. If you would like a better vaccine rollout in your state, I encourage you to have your governor have a sexual harassment scandal, because our governor here in New York is trying his very, very best to distract attention from the fact that he is a serial sexual harasser by vaccinating lots of people. And I'm like, there are worse things he could do to distract people's attention away from his misdeeds.
Yeah, the governor here in New Jersey, we've got Paul Murphy, who is by all accounts a compassionate, ethical, principled guy. I have a dear friend who recently left a longtime job to go join his staff in Trenton at the State House. But I gotta say, his rollout of the vaccine and has made me yearn for the comparative efficacy of the Chris Christie administration. Which says something about that, let me tell you. Whew.
Let's talk about medical and government, because I've learned a lot about my government and a lot about medical healthcare systems. Like, I kind of knew they were racist, like kind of like breathing, I knew they were racist, but man, the health disparity and health access disparity has just shown his whole ass. There's no other way to put that in this last year. The communities who are getting served, who are getting treated, and those who are not. It has been a horrific year of watching people who desperately need medical care not being able to get it, to access it, or being told, you know what, considering the stuff that you got going on, you should just kind of go home and die. And I don't say that flippantly, y'all, but I feel like there has been so many cases of medical neglect or abuse or just disinvestment. And it's really sad. It's really sad. I'm going to throw it to my friend Chris very intentionally, because even in getting vaccinated, the treatment of people of color has been pretty not cute.
And you know, so my experience for you all was I tried to get vaccinated. I got an invitation to get vaccinated after I signed up in my health system. I went to go get vaccinated, and the white woman who was staffing the desk denied me my vaccine and then called security to have me removed. And you know, that was me, and I did, you know, write to all the right people and got press coverage about it, and you know, got my vaccine a couple days afterwards after I was supposed to. But I know how to use those systems, and I know how to, you know, shame people into doing the right thing, and that's not all of our community's experience. And I was just on Instagram today, and another woman of color in my same area went to go get vaccinated. Same thing. The woman who was staffing the table said, you know, you don't have the right kind of ID. And as a healthcare worker, which she's a therapist, but she didn't have the right kind of identification, workplace identification, and was going to deny her the vaccine. And she was very lucky that a police officer actually was there and stepped in and said, everybody is eligible now over 45, you know, in Virginia. So can you just get her vaccinated? And she did. And that was somebody using their privilege, you know, in order to make that happen. But again, it just points out all of the things that are going on that, you know, I'm talking to the folks in my community, in the Latino community here. And, you know, the questions are, you know, the safety of the vaccine always comes up first. And that's something that we can talk to folks about and say, you know, I got vaccinated and here's why I believe it's safe and all of that kind of thing. But the barriers to vaccination are huge. So who's vaccinating at 9 and 10 o'clock at night, right? When people are off from work? Who is vaccinating on public transit lines, right? Who is vaccinating when you're going to a medical center that maybe you have an outstanding bill at that medical center and you think that they're going to ask you to pay that bill before you can get vaccinated? Who's vaccinating, whose vaccination cards are coming in different languages? Why do you need to have that vaccination card and carry it around? Because I can tell you from people who are with immigrant status, there are issues around having papers that you have to carry around. And so all of these questions are questions that, you know, and you know, one of the things I hear over and over again on the news, and it just sets me on edge, is, well, you know, we're vaccinating over 65 because our elderly population are particularly at risk. And I agree with that. And who gets to live to be over 65? That is a question that we need to be asking. Who in the U.S. gets healthcare, gets, you know, nutrition, gets you know, housing, gets all of the things that you need in order to be able to live past 65. Because I guarantee you that we know that there's disparity in life expectancy between Black and brown communities and white communities. So yes, I'm not saying we don't want to take care of our elderly folks, or not even elderly folks, our over 65 population. And we need to actively be looking at how to meet those racial disparities, because it is Black and brown bodies that are in the ICU.
And thank you. You just preached the word. So I'm going to take a deep breath and acknowledge the word you just preached. And I just want to say, this isn't something that's going away. When we look in the future and we think about we've learned a bunch of things, but what do we still need to be working on and doing going forward? Absolutely dismantling systems around healthcare access in all of the ways Chris just named. All of the ways. Who's on a bus line? Who's around at 10 o'clock at night? Can my 65-year-old stay at home a little bit longer so my 45-year-old can get vaccinated so they can go teach in a classroom? So like, how are we, there's all of these layers, and Chris, thank you. Thank you for saying all of those things. You brought up a word, and I want to throw this one in there, y'all. I be moving fast. Let's talk about intimate partnership and intimacy, emotional, physical, spiritual intimacy. I live alone. Ain't nobody been in my house but my co-parent and my kids. And my co-parent stands in the doorway to make sure he can get his kids. He's welcome in my house, but he just don't come in because his boots have been muddy and I'm not mopping. Do you know what I'm saying? That's it. That's it. Nobody else is, and that has crossed the threshold of this door. And so no part of my life was prepared to not have physical touch, physical intimacy, emotional intimacy. I mean, I'm making those things happen, but it was, that learning curve was steep. I'm like, I have to force my kids to hug me. I'm like, look, you want dinner? I get a 30-second hug. We're bartering for hugs over here. I don't have any pets. I don't have a cat or a dog or even a fish. So it's been this really interesting year, learning my limits and my boundaries, and learning when, that sadness right there, that's because I miss people. Oh, got that third blanket on my bed because I miss people. I wish I had a weighted blanket and a hug. Let me go buy this full body pillow so I can squeeze it. So it's been an interesting year. I'll leave it there and let folks speak.
Yeah, I live alone. And I was in a conversation earlier today where I said, it's been a year since I've hugged anyone. And I just had to drop out of a project because that sort of thing on my mental health is just brutal. It's just brutal. My social community, when I'm able to have one, because, I'm a minister. But like, my friends are the ones who will go stand at the bus stop with a sign that says free hugs, right? Like, those are my people. And I have not had physical contact with another human being except for the occasional touch of skin to skin at the grocery store when I get change. And I know that it's not like fantasy making this up about what that does to people. There's science, behind this. And when infants are exposed to this sort of a situation, they die. Babies who are not touched die. Adults who are not touched get mad as hell, and get depressed and all of the stuff that goes with that. And so I think about, I know what it's doing to me, but I think about my seniors, who are isolated. I think about all of those folks who live in assisted living places that have been on lockdown forever, right? I just want to lift up that Kathy Bauer posted in the chat, divorce during pandemic. Like, that sort of situation is no fun no matter when you do it. But not having access to the hugs of friends and the support of people is a exquisite section of hell, I think. And that's just like, I haven't had that sort of problem in my life, and being alone is rotten. But yeah, just the isolation is really, really hard. And I wanted to say one more thing. Like, the dishwashing and the cooking and that kind of stuff, and people say, that's a great time for meditation and reflection. And I say, yes, if that's your plan, if, like, consent matters, and it's like, I grew up poor in the woods, right? And I know plenty of people who want to do this back to the nature thing, right? They want to get back. They want to like get a wood stove and go off the grid. And I'm like, man, we lived for 3 years without plumbing. That's no fun. Like, sure, it's an adventure if you want to do it. But if you don't, it's just hard work and uncomfortable and miserable. And in some ways, a source of shame. So like, I know that there are people who can get their meditation stuff happening while they do dishes. I am not one of those people. And for me, it is just a torture. So the cooking thing, I love to cook. I love to cook. It's science. It's a mad scientist in a lab sort of thing. Love that. But if that's not your gift and that's not your skill and you're over your head and overwhelmed and you've got mouths that want food, it ain't no sorts of creative fulfillment in that moment.
Thank you for saying that, Don. I appreciate you right now, for calling out consent and choice versus have to, right? Thank you. I'm just going to leave it there and say thank you.
Okay. On the other hand, I grew up poor in the woods with a survivalist. So I had trained my whole life for how to eat like this and how to cook like this and what you can do with 3 cans of beans and a 10-pound bag of rice. Look out, baby. It has manifested itself in a weird way in that I went out and bought a little chest freezer, which I am now like stockpiling like my dad. Like buying stuff that's on sale. I live alone. There's no reason why I need 12 pounds of ground beef in the damn freezer. But I'm ready. I don't know what for, but I'm ready. So it'll be full soon and then I can stop buying food.
That's what you think. Y'all, we have about 13 more minutes left, and I guess I want to lean into, I'm just directing this whole conversation, but nobody's fighting me, so I'm not, here we are. So in terms of intimacy, I also want to bring up a little bit around spiritual intimacy. Some of you preach, some of you run congregations. I work for a congregation. What does it mean to have a faith walk and participation that was really reliant on being in person? And having that in-person piece taken away, where and Aisha was talking about this earlier, where a lot of people take a lot of community and a lot of fellowship from being together, but that layer is gone. So how do we create and maintain spiritual intimacy when one of our primary modes of absorbing it is gone? I'm gonna call on Reverend Michael over there.
It's an interesting question, QuianaDenae. I miss being with my people. I miss my own spiritual community, which is an annual summer conference, SUSI, that, we're going to miss at least 2 of in person. Last year's and this year's, both are virtual. And I think it's possible to have real relationships with people and not be in person with one another. And I think that CLF has certainly proven that for 75 years. But my first sermon to an empty room last March 15th was about how the way we were practicing love for one another was doing what we needed to do to make sure that we survived this. And that meant not being in the same room with one another was how we were embodying love for one another. Right? So every time we were gathering and not being in the same room with one another, we had to remind ourselves that was an embodiment of the love that we had for one another. And that love was real. It wasn't fake love because we weren't in the same room. So, we've learned it's not the same when you can't hold someone's hand, right? to be present. It's a different kind of presence, but it's still presence. It's still real presence. It's still possible presence. And if it means I love you because I'm not in the same room with you, it's deeper in a certain sort of way. I'm so tired of doing everything on the computer that I can't do fun things on Zoom. It's very hard for me. Like, people are like, "Oh, let's have a Zoom birthday party," or "Oh, come to my Zoom housewarming," or "Oh, come to my Zoom ordination," and I'm like, "No, if it's optional." But I need to connect with people. Like, I need to have relationships, and if this is the way I can do it, this is the way I have to do it. And those relationships are real. So, I mean, I, I hate to put it that way. Has it changed things? Yes, of course it's changed things. But the relationships are still real with the people in the community I serve. And the relationships are real. As you have your 3 members of the lead ministry team of CLF here. Our relationships with the Church of the Larger Fellowship, with y'all out there who are CLF members, our relationships with you are real, even if we've never met you in person, and especially since we don't see you on a regular basis. I'm talking to you. I know how to talk to a green dot now, and have that be
We
thousands of people that I
thousands of
love.
we had in East Shore, the brick and mortar, folks who were shut in, who hadn't been to a service in years, loved that we were on Zoom and that everybody was there together. So yeah, absolutely, that for those of us accustomed to being together in person, it was an adjustment. But we had people in their 80s and 70s and 80s thrilled that we were on Zoom. And it was, easily 20 people that were just able to see their friend. And then we had some people who were like, I will never be on Zoom, so you will not see me again until we were back in church. So we had both, but it was touching to find out that there were people and people who moved, who just said, oh, I can be back. So yes, it was, and yes to the CLF, right? We're global. So this is how CLF has always been. But it definitely, I just remember getting notes from people who said, I finally can be part of the community again.
So as we lean into these last 8 minutes, what is something, so let's say it's March 2022. I didn't even know if I said that right. What is something from this time, from this experience, that you're going to take away? And I'll start by saying, I have bloomed in a very different way during COVID. I started a youth program. I launched a bunch of stuff with Blue, Black Lives Unitarian Universalist. I was able to do some innovative programming in my brick and mortar church in the capacity in which I serve there that I would have never have done had this moment not come around sheltering in place and still wanting to get my needs of my family and my community met. So what I will take away is that there's always a way to gather. There's always a way to be together. And we can be innovative about so many things. And ministry and being in community is another space where we get to be innovative and creative in how we come together. I won't let that go. I won't let being creative stop. And then the fun sidebar, one of the things I've learned is time zones are very real. And if you don't share them explicitly, I've actually started writing my time, your time, after not even ET, CT, PT, your time, my time, because I'm doing the conversion hoping I get Seattle time, right? Because 5 for me is 2 for you, Aisha, right? So I've learned about time zones. They are real. They are not made up. So I pass the mic to my co-host. What's something you're going to take away that'll be with you for a while, no matter what is happening?
I think for me, it's the idea, which is a very Unitarian Universalist idea, that we already have heaven on earth. We have all of the resources to make heaven on earth. There isn't anything lacking. We just need to redistribute it. We need to live up to our values. And, when I look at the work that we did in our community early in during the pandemic, and we got out over $4 million to folks in our community. And that money existed, like hard dollars into our community. And that money existed before, during, and after this pandemic. And, you know, it was, people were glad to do it. People were glad to give that money and glad to help their neighbor. And how do we continue to live into that spirit of generosity and live into that spirit of understanding that we really can take care of each other? That's one of the things that I'm really trying to take back, because I knew it from our theology, but to actually see it happen and see people, you know, the relief on people's face when they could go out and buy diapers and formula, is just, it's a different thing.
I posted on my Facebook page, in my social media, that my goal in this work is liberation. It's not inclusion. Because in our systems, there are Black and brown people who are cops. There are Black and brown people who work in prisons. There are Black and brown people who are in the hospitals, and vaccines still aren't being distributed. And so the goal, even I was that way, and now even more so, that the goal is liberation. Inclusion is may or may not be one way toward that goal, but that's diverse. I mean, I do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and even in the CLF, but that's not the goal. Like, we need to be liberated from these systems that are harming even the oppressors. But they, you know, I mean, yes and no. Of course, they get access to healthcare and vaccines, and who's skipping the line. And so that's even, I think, expanding our imaginations, which this pandemic has shown we're able to do the thing. How many congregations said, oh, we can't do that? There's no way we can do XYZ. And in a week, we learned to do XYZ because the whole world shut down. So imagine that. It's just, to Chris's point, the money was there. We need to expand our imaginations, and the goal needs to be liberation for all of us.
I think the thing that I'm seeing that brings my heart the most joy is looking at the members of the congregation that I serve and remembering how frightened they were a year ago and how self-assured and competent they're feeling now. You know, they're like, we got this. Like, you know, we know how to do this thing now. It's not like exactly like we'd like it, but we got a handle on it, you know? I told them a year ago that when we get through this, and we would get through it, that we will be changed people, individually and collectively. And yes, there's trauma, and yes, there will be scars, but I'm seeing a whole lot of claimed strength in those faces. That's what brings me joy.
Claimed strength, what a powerful phraseology. Michael, did you want to close us out with your?
You know, I don't know. I haven't. I'm still working on what I'm going to take out of this. But as we reach the top of the hour, I want us to just spend a moment contemplating the fact that around the world, 2.6 million people have died in the last year who did not need to die because of this pandemic. In the United States, it's about 530,000 people now. It's more than one person a minute for the last year, because any of you who know the musical Rent know how many minutes there are in a year. And 530,000 people officially. That's the official count, right? That's not even the unofficial count.
Like New York nursing homes, what now?
New York counted the people, they just didn't count them in the nursing homes. They counted them in hospitals, but that's a whole different thing. But 2.6 million people around the world. I want us to just spend a moment absorbing the enormity of that loss. It's hit many of us personally. I know no one who does not have someone they love who has been lost to this pandemic. And that scar on our collective soul will take a long time to not hurt. Longer for those of us who are also the targets of systemic injustice in our society, but a long time for all of us. So thank you, beloved, for being here this hour, for sharing your stories in the chat. Those of you who are listening to us on podcast, share your stories with us through CLF channels. Tell us.
We're going to
your
have
story.
that. Yeah, we're going to have that available for folks. We're going to have a call-in number for folks to be able to share their stories, and we're going to be launching that really soon. So thank you all.
Look for that. We want you to be part of this commemoration. We want you to be heard. Until next week.